August 29, 1944. German officers watch in disbelief as American truck convoys stretch beyond the horizon. 5,938 vehicles. 12,342 tons of supplies. In a single day. This wasn't just logistics. This was a weapon Germany had no counter for. The summer of 1944 witnessed something unprecedented on French roads. After breaking out from Normandy, American forces advanced so rapidly that traditional supply methods completely collapsed. What followed was an improvised solution born of desperation that became one of the most successful military logistics operations in history. This is the story of the Red Ball Express and how American trucks defeated the Wehrmacht as surely as any tank or bomber. By August 1944, Allied forces faced a paradoxical problem. They were winning too fast. General Patton's Third Army was advancing 50 to 75 miles per week. Some weeks, they covered 80 miles. By mid-August, elements had reached the Seine River over 150 miles from the Normandy beaches. But there was a critical problem. France's rail infrastructure lay in ruins. Allied bombing that had isolated Normandy before D-Day had also destroyed the railways that should have supplied advancing armies. Every division needed 700 to 750 tons of supplies daily. With 28 Allied divisions advancing by late August, total requirements exceeded 20,000 tons per day. Patton's armoured divisions alone consumed 400,000 gallons of gasoline daily. And the supply trucks? They were literally running out of gas within sight of retreating German forces. The mathematics were brutal. A truck delivering supplies 200 miles from Normandy required over 50 hours for a complete round trip. The same truck could make 2 deliveries daily when the front was only 50 miles away. By August 20th, the rapid advance that had characterized the month was about to stop, not because of enemy resistance, but because logistics couldn't keep pace. In a desperate 36-hour planning session beginning August 23rd, Transportation Corps officers developed a revolutionary solution. They would create dedicated express routes using parallel one-way highways reserved exclusively for military supply traffic, operating continuously, 24 hours per day. The system would be called the Red Ball Express. The name came from 19th-century American railroad practice. Starting around 1892, the Santa Fe Railroad marked priority freight cars with red balls, giving them right-of-way over all other traffic. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Colonel Loren Albert Ayers received command. His challenge? Assemble approximately 6,000 vehicles and 23,000 drivers working in 2-man teams. The trucks were readily available. General Motors had produced 562,000 CCKW trucks, the deuce and a half between 1,941 and 1,945. These 2.5-ton workhorses featured 6-wheel drive, 91 horsepower engines, and could carry 5 tons on highways. But here's what made them revolutionary: standardization. Every truck was identical. Same specifications, same parts. Any mechanic could service any truck. Any driver could operate any vehicle. This single advantage, taken for granted in American manufacturing, exceeded German capabilities by orders of magnitude. Finding drivers proved more challenging than securing trucks. The solution reflected the harsh realities of 1942 America. Approximately 75% of Red Ball drivers would be African American soldiers. The American military in 1944 remained strictly segregated. Military leadership believed African Americans unsuitable for combat roles, relegating most black soldiers to service and support units. These soldiers, denied combat roles not because of ability but because of skin color, would prove their capabilities under conditions as demanding as any faced by frontline troops. Most drivers were under 24 years old. Many had never driven trucks before. military service. They came from every region of America, united by determination to contribute to victory, despite facing discrimination at home and within the military itself. Washington Rector of the 3916th Quartermaster Truck Company later recalled, "You accepted discrimination. We were warned not to fraternize with whites for fear problems would arise." One veteran remembered white drivers whiplashing their trucks into the center of roadways to prevent black drivers from passing, creating danger. Games of chicken on roads where speed was essential. Yet despite discrimination, exhaustion, and danger, Red Ball drivers would maintain operations that kept Allied armies advancing. On August 25, 1944, the Red Ball Express began operations. 67 truck companies commanding 3,558 trucks moved 4,482 tons on the first day. Within 4 days, operations expanded to 132 truck companies operating 5,958 vehicles. The system created a continuous loop unlike anything attempted in military logistics history. 2 parallel highways were commandeered between Normandy and forward supply depots. The northern route carried loaded trucks eastward. The southern route brought empty vehicles back. All civilian traffic was prohibited. Every truck displayed red balls painted on both sides and the front radiator. Military police from the 793rd MP Battalion recorded convoy movements, provided directions, and maintained discipline at every major intersection. Official regulations called for convoys of 5 or more trucks traveling 60 feet apart at 25 miles per hour, with 10-minute rest breaks every hour. In practice, these regulations were frequently ignored. Individual trucks departed immediately after loading rather than waiting for convoys. Drivers disabled engine governors that limited top speed to 45 miles per hour, routinely exceeding 60 miles per hour on straightaways. Rest breaks were skipped when drivers felt capable of continuing. The mission's urgency overrode safety regulations. Private James Rucard, a 9-year-old from Ohio, later described the experience. There were dead bodies and dead horses on the highways after bombs dropped. I was scared, but I did my job hoping for the best. Being young and about 4,000 miles away from home, anybody would be scared. The round trip from Cherbourg to Chartres covered approximately 250 miles and officially required 54 hours. Drivers worked in 2-man teams, alternating between driving and sleeping in the truck cab. In reality, road conditions, mechanical breakdowns, and operational pressures meant drivers often went days with minimal sleep. On August 29, 1944, the system reached its absolute peak. 5,938 vehicles delivered 12,342 tons of supplies in a single day. Let that sink in. This represented more tonnage than Germany's entire logistics system in France could move through ALL methods, combined truck, rail, and horse-drawn transport on their best day. At any given moment during operations, 900 trucks were being loaded or unloaded. 2,000 trucks moved, loaded toward the front. 2,000 returned empty to Normandy. The remainder underwent refueling or maintenance. The system processed over 6,000 vehicle movements daily while maintaining continuous operations. Sustaining Red Ball itself required massive resources. 6,000 trucks consumed approximately 2 million gallons of gasoline monthly just to operate separate from the fuel they transported. Tire wear exhausted approximately 50,000 tires during 83 days of operations. Maintenance requirements meant roughly 10% of the fleet was disabled for repairs at any given time. For German forces, American logistics created insurmountable problems. Traditional German defensive doctrine assumed attacking forces would eventually outrun their supply lines, creating vulnerable pauses that defenders could exploit through counterattacks. American logistics eliminated these opportunities. German military logistics in 1944 relied heavily on horse-drawn transport. Germany had entered the war with approximately 2.75 million horses, and their dependence actually increased as the war progressed. A typical German infantry division in France included approximately 50 motorized vehicles and 1,500 horse-drawn wagons, pulled by 4,000 to 6,000 horses. These animals required 12 pounds of oats and 15 pounds of hay daily, plus constant water access. In offensive operations, horses could move approximately 15 to 20 miles per day before requiring rest. German supply columns of 40 horse-drawn wagons and a dozen trucks could move approximately 40 tons of supplies 20 kilometers forward. By comparison, a single Red Ball convoy of 50 trucks could move 125 tons of supplies 200 kilometers in the same time period. This 0-to-1 advantage in logistics capacity gave American forces operational capabilities German commanders simply could not match. German Wehrmacht logistics officers, who became prisoners of war, uniformly expressed shock at American logistics capacity during interrogations. They had studied American industrial production, and new capacity exceeded German output, but assumed distances would create exploitable vulnerabilities. Instead, they discovered American logistics had no breaking point they could find. Between August 25 and November 16, 1944, the Red Ball Express delivered between 412,000 and 420,000 tons of supplies. This represented over 1 million individual truckloads moved an average distance of 250 miles. The operational scope expanded beyond the original route as Allied forces advanced. Multiple express routes operated across France. The White Ball Express from Le Havre and Rouen to Paris, the Little Red Ball carrying priority supplies to Paris, the Green Diamond Express to railheads 100 miles inland, the Red Lion Express supplying British forces in Belgium, the ABC Express connecting Antwerp to depots 90 miles inland. The cost was measured in exhausted personnel and worn-out equipment. Red Ball trucks required major repairs approximately every 30 days. Personnel casualties from accidents, exhaustion, and enemy encounters totaled several hundred. Yet this cost was minimal compared to strategic value delivered. Red Ball Express enabled Allied forces to maintain pressure on retreating German armies at the moment when sustained pursuit might have ended the war in 1944. The Red Ball Express officially ended operations on November 16, 1944. French rail lines had been sufficiently repaired, and the port of Antwerp had fully opened, dramatically shortening supply lines. But the impact lasted far beyond those 83 days. General Dwight Eisenhower included the 2.5-ton truck on his list of 6 most vital weapons that won the war in Europe, alongside the C-47 transport aircraft, the Jeep, the bazooka, the atomic bomb, and the bulldozer. The racial composition of Red Ball units reflected America's segregated military while simultaneously undermining the racist assumptions that created segregation. 3/4 of Red Ball drivers were black soldiers assigned to non-combat units, not because of ability, but because military leadership maintained racial restrictions. These men proved their courage, competence, and dedication under conditions as demanding as combat troops. General Patton, despite his own prejudices, acknowledged, "The 2.5-ton truck is our most valuable weapon." After the war, African-American Red Ball drivers returned to a segregated America. Many faced continued discrimination, yet their achievement contributed to growing pressure for military integration. President Truman's 1948 executive order integrating the armed forces drew partly on evidence that racial segregation harmed military effectiveness, evidence that Red Ball drivers helped provide. The Red Ball Express proved a fundamental principle of modern warfare. Industrial capacity wins wars. Those trucks rolling through France carried not just supplies, but proof that America possessed industrial capacity on a scale Germany could never match. 83 days, 412,000 tons, 50,000 tires worn out, thousands of young drivers pushed beyond reasonable limits. But those 83 days changed military logistics forever and helped end World War II in Europe by ensuring Allied armies never slowed for want of supplies. History remembers the dramatic moments, the landings at Normandy, the liberation of Paris, the crossing of the Rhine. But behind every advance stood the unglamorous but essential work of logistics. The Red Ball Express demonstrated that victories are won in factories and on supply roads as much as on battlefields, that the soldiers who drive trucks deserve recognition equal to those who drive tanks. That was America's true secret weapon. Not just the ability to produce more than any adversary, but the capacity to deliver production to the point of need faster than enemies could respond. The Red Ball Express symbolized this advantage, rolling through France day and night, delivering victory one truckload at a time. December 16th, 1944. Hitler launches his final gamble, the Battle of the Bulge. His target, the port of Antwerp. His assumption? American supply lines would snap like twigs. He was about to discover just how catastrophically wrong he was. By December 1944, the Red Ball Express had officially ended operations. The port of Antwerp was open. French railways were repaired. The desperate truck convoys of August seemed like ancient history. But Hitler believed he'd found America's weakness. Cut the supply lines, capture the fuel dumps, split the Allied armies. What happened next would prove the ultimate test of American logistics and demonstrate once and for all that Germany had already lost the logistics war before the First Panzer rolled. Adolf Hitler conceived the Ardennes counteroffensive in autumn 1944 with a desperate clarity. Germany was losing. The only hope was a devastating blow that would force negotiations. His plan was audacious. 3 German armies, over 200,000 men, would smash through weakly held American lines in the Ardennes forest. They would drive northwest to Antwerp, splitting British forces in the north from American forces in the south. Without Antwerp's port, American logistics would collapse. Without supplies, American armies would stall. Without momentum, the Western Allies might negotiate rather than continue grinding toward Berlin. Hitler's planning assumed one critical factor. Captured American fuel dumps would supply advancing German forces. German Panzer divisions began operations with fuel for only 150 kilometers of advance. That's roughly 93 miles. The distance to Antwerp? Over 150 miles. Hitler calculated this wasn't a problem. American supply dumps were everywhere. His forces would simply capture what they needed as they advanced. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. This assumption that American logistics, infrastructure could be captured and exploited revealed how fundamentally Hitler misunderstood what he was facing. The Wehrmacht had spent 4 years fighting enemies whose supply systems could be disrupted, whose logistics could collapse, whose fuel dumps could be captured intact. They were about to encounter something entirely different. December 16th, 1944. At 5:30 a.m., German artillery opened fire across an 80-mile front in the Ardennes. American forces holding this quiet sector were hit by the largest German offensive on the Western Front since 1940. Green divisions fresh from training, exhausted divisions resting after brutal fighting in the Hürtgen forest. They faced 3 German armies with complete tactical surprise. Within 48 hours, German Panzer spearheads had punched through American lines and were racing west. The 1st SS Panzer Division advanced 30 miles in 3 days. The 2nd Panzer Division reached within 4 miles of the Meuse River by December 24th. American command scrambled to respond. General Eisenhower immediately recognized this wasn't a local attack. This was Germany's main effort. He ordered massive reinforcements rushed to the Ardennes. But reinforcements need supplies. Defensive positions need ammunition. Artillery needs shells. Tanks need fuel. And the Red Ball Express was officially over. Or was it? What Hitler didn't understand, what German intelligence completely failed to grasp, was that the Red Ball Express wasn't just a temporary system. It was proof of a logistics philosophy. American logistics wasn't rigid. It was adaptable, redundant, overwhelming. Within hours of the German breakthrough, Transportation Corps units across France and Belgium received emergency orders. Every available truck was redirected toward the Ardennes. Supply dumps throughout Belgium began emergency evacuation procedures. This is where Red Ball drivers and the thousands of other Transportation Corps soldiers who'd kept armies supplied since Normandy proved their true value. German Panzer commanders expected to find fuel dumps intact. They found empty depots and blown bridges. The 1st SS Panzer Division under Joachim Peiper drove toward Stavelot, expecting to capture American fuel reserves. When they arrived, they found the dump abandoned 50,000 gallons of gasoline evacuated just hours earlier. How? Red Ball Express drivers. These weren't combat troops trained for fighting withdrawals. These were logistics soldiers, many of them the same African-American drivers who'd sustained the August advance, who raced through chaotic conditions, evacuating supplies ahead of German spearheads. Private Leon Bass, serving with a port battalion, later described the scene. "We could hear artillery getting closer. Nobody told us exactly what to do. We just started loading trucks with everything we could and driving west. We passed infantry going the other way to fight, and we were hauling out ammunition they'd need." Meanwhile, supplies were flowing in the opposite direction. By December 19th, just 3 days into the offensive American supply, convoys were delivering ammunition to defensive positions at rates that stunned German commanders. Bastogne became the symbol of American resistance during the Bulge. The 101st Airborne Division rushed to the town with barely hours' notice, held against overwhelming German forces for days. But here's what most histories overlook. Holding Bastogne required supplies. The 101st arrived with minimal ammunition and no winter equipment. They were supposed to be resting in France after Operation Market Garden. Instead, they were surrounded in a frozen Belgian town facing multiple German divisions. Weather prevented air resupply for days. So how did they hold? Truck convoys. Before German forces completed the encirclement on December 21st, Transportation Corps units made repeated supply runs into Bastogne under artillery fire. These weren't armoured columns. These were supply. Trucks, GMC CKCWs marked with various unit insignias, driven by soldiers who'd spent months mastering the art of keeping armies supplied. Sergeant Curtis Whiteway of the 969th Quartermaster Company described one run. "We had maybe 6 trucks. German artillery was hitting the road. We just floored it and didn't stop until we reached the town. Unloaded in maybe 15 minutes and got out the same way we came in." These supply runs before the encirclement delivered critical ammunition that sustained the 101st during the first days of siege. When weather finally cleared on December 23rd, allowing air resupply, the ammunition delivered by truck convoys had already enabled the defenders to hold. After Patton's Third Army broke through to Bastogne on December 26th, the logistics challenge became sustaining offensive operations in winter conditions. Third Army had pivoted 90 degrees from attacking east toward Germany to attacking north into the Bulge in 48 hours. This maneuver, considered among the most impressive operational movements of the war, was only possible because American logistics could sustain it. Patton's tanks needed 800,000 gallons of fuel to reach Bastogne. They got it. His artillery fired preparatory barrages, consuming thousands of shells. They never ran short. His infantry attacked in sub-zero temperatures. They received winter clothing, hot food, and medical supplies. German forces facing this onslaught couldn't comprehend what they were experiencing. By December 22nd, 6 days into the offensive, major German Panzer formations were reporting critical fuel shortages. The 2nd SS Panzer Division halted after crossing the Arthe River, immobilized by empty fuel tanks within sight of objectives. The 1st SS Panzer Division abandoned dozens of vehicles after exhausting fuel supplies. Their advance ended not through American resistance, but through logistics failure. German ammunition shortages developed almost immediately. Artillery units, conducting preparatory fires, exhausted stocks within days. Resupply failed because German horse-drawn supply columns could not navigate icy Belgian roads at speeds necessary to keep pace with advancing units. Think about that contrast. While American trucks were evacuating fuel dumps ahead of German advances, and delivering supplies to defensive positions, and sustaining Patton's counterattack simultaneously, German logistics couldn't even resupply their own. Offensive. The few motorized supply units Germany retained lacked sufficient fuel to operate effectively. Horses couldn't maintain pace. Rail lines were destroyed by Allied air power. The Wehrmacht's logistics system, already inadequate in good conditions, completely collapsed in the Ardennes winter. Captured German documents reveal the desperation. One Panzer Division commander reported, "Fuel situation catastrophic, all combat vehicles immobilized. Request immediate resupply." The reply, "No fuel available. Await further orders." Those orders never came. There was no fuel to send. Meanwhile, American logistics responded to the crisis with speed that German planners considered impossible. Despite losing important supply dumps in the initial breakthrough, American forces re-established supply lines faster than German forces could exploit the disruption. Artillery units defending key positions fired without restrictions, expending ammunition at rates that would have exhausted German stocks immediately. Tank battalions received fuel deliveries that enabled continuous operations. Infantry received hot meals trucked to frontline positions. By January 1945, the Battle of the Bulge was over. German forces withdrew to their original positions, having achieved nothing except catastrophic casualties they couldn't replace, and equipment losses that could never be rebuilt. Hitler's gamble to exploit American logistics vulnerability had failed completely. Not because the plan was tactically flawed, German forces achieved significant initial success, but because the fundamental assumption was wrong. American logistics had no breaking point Germany could reach. The battle proved definitively what Red Ball Express had demonstrated in August. Modern warfare was decided by industrial capacity and logistics efficiency as much as battlefield tactics. Wehrmacht logistics officers interrogated after the battle expressed almost identical assessments. They'd calculated American logistics capacity before the offensive. They'd studied supply routes. They'd identified what they believed were vulnerable points. Every calculation was wrong. Not slightly wrong, catastrophically wrong. One captured German logistics officer stated, "We estimated American forces would require 48 hours to re-establish supply lines after our breakthrough. They did it in less than 24 hours. We assumed captured dumps would supply our advance. Every dump was evacuated. We believed winter weather would slow their logistics. They operated faster than we could in summer. The numbers tell the story." During the Battle of the Bulge, American forces fired more artillery ammunition in 6 weeks than Germany's entire Western Front forces had available in stockpiles. American tank units consumed more fuel in 1 month than German forces received in quarterly allocations. American logistics delivered supplies at rates exceeding German peacetime training exercise consumption. The Battle of the Bulge was Germany's final attempt to exploit what Hitler believed was America's weakness. Instead, it became the ultimate demonstration of American strength. Those Red Ball Express drivers, the ones who'd sustained the August advance, who'd worked through exhaustion and discrimination, who'd proven logistics could win wars, they were ready when the crisis came. They evacuated fuel dumps ahead of German spearheads. They delivered ammunition to Bastogne under fire. They sustained Patton's counterattack through winter weather. They did everything asked of them, and more. The GMC CCKW trucks that formed Red Ball's backbone proved their worth again. Same standardization, same reliability, same capacity to operate under conditions that broke other systems. Hitler had bet everything on the assumption that American logistics would collapse under pressure. He lost that bet catastrophically. German forces in the Ardennes faced unlimited American material expenditure. Artillery barrages that never stopped because ammunition never ran short. Tank attacks that never paused because fuel kept flowing. Infantry assaults supported by supplies that seemed inexhaustible. This was the legacy of Red Ball Express. Not just 83 days of operations in autumn 1944, but a logistics philosophy that made American forces effectively unstoppable once they achieved battlefield momentum. Germany lost World War II in many places: at Stalingrad, in the skies over Germany, on the beaches of Normandy. but they also lost it on the roads of France and Belgium, where American trucks rolling day and night proved that industrial capacity wins modern wars. The soldiers who drove those trucks, many of them African-American men serving a segregated nation, all of them young men pushed beyond reasonable limits. They were as essential to victory as anyone who carried a rifle or flew a bomber. History remembers the battles, but wars are won in supply depots and on logistics routes. The Red Ball Express and every operation that followed proved this truth definitively. May 8th. 1945. Victory in Europe. American forces stand on the Elbe River, having advanced from Normandy to the heart of Germany in 11 months. Behind them stretches a supply line that moved 7 million tons across a continent, and it all started with those red-balled trucks rolling through France. The Red Ball Express officially ended November 16, 1944, just 83 days of operations. But those 83 days rewrote the rules of modern warfare. This is the final chapter, the story of what happened after the trucks stopped rolling, how those drivers changed military history, why their innovation still shapes how armies fight today, and what happened to the men who proved that logistics wins wars. After the Battle of the Bulge collapsed in January 1945, Allied forces resumed their advance into Germany. The logistics lessons learned since Normandy now operated with devastating efficiency. The port of Antwerp, fully operational by late November 1944, processed tonnage that exceeded all pre-war European ports combined. Deep-water berths unloaded Liberty ships in 48 hours cargo that would have taken weeks through the Normandy beaches. From Antwerp, supplies moved via restored railways, truck convoys using Red Ball principles, and even aerial resupply when necessary. The system featured redundancy at every level. If one route failed, 3 others compensated. By March 1945, American forces in Europe operated the most sophisticated logistics network ever created. Over 29,000 trucks moved supplies daily. Rail lines carried 200,000 tons weekly. Supply depots stretched from French ports to the Rhine River, each stocked to sustain operations for weeks. German forces facing this juggernaut couldn't comprehend the disparity. Every defensive position received unlimited artillery preparation before American infantry attacked. Every breakthrough was immediately exploited because fuel never ran short. Every casualty was evacuated because medical supplies and ambulances were abundant. The crossing of the Rhine in March 1945 demonstrated logistics dominance in its purest form. Operation Plunder involved moving 250,000 troops, 3,500 artillery pieces, and thousands of vehicles across the river. The preliminary bombardment fired more shells in 24 hours than the entire German army possessed. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, commanding the operation, had supplies stockpiled for 500,000 men for 40 days. This represented 500,000 tons of ammunition, fuel, food, and equipment positioned, organized, and ready for immediate use. The Germans defending the Rhine fired their artillery until ammunition exhausted, usually within hours. Then they were overrun by forces whose guns never stopped firing because shells kept arriving. By April, German resistance was collapsing everywhere. Not because soldiers wouldn't fight, but because armies cannot fight without supplies. German units were immobilized by fuel shortages, unable to fire artillery because of ammunition shortages, and starving because food distribution had broken down. The Wehrmacht's logistics system, inadequate from the war's beginning, had completely disintegrated. American logistics, meanwhile, functioned so smoothly it had become invisible. Soldiers at the front simply assumed supplies would arrive. They always did. Behind these statistics were the men who'd made it possible. The Red Ball Express drivers and thousands of other Transportation Corps soldiers who'd sustained operations since D-Day. They'd paid a price that peacetime accounting never adequately measured. Maintenance records indicate Red Ball trucks required major repairs every 30 days during peak operations. But trucks could be rebuilt. The men couldn't. Driver fatigue caused accidents that killed and injured hundreds. One veteran described seeing a driver fall asleep at the wheel and crash into a ravine, killing both men in the cab. Another recalled a convoy pile-up when the lead truck missed a curve in blackout. Conditions: 7 trucks destroyed, 4 drivers dead. These weren't combat casualties counted in official battle reports. They were logistics casualties, less dramatic but equally final. Young men who died serving their country far from battlefields that would be remembered in history books. For African American drivers, the pain extended beyond physical danger. They'd served magnificently under conditions as demanding as combat. They'd proved their courage, competence, and dedication. They'd helped win the war. And they returned to a segregated America that still denied them basic rights. Sergeant Edward Donald of the 3,893rd Quartermaster Truck Company recalled returning home to Mississippi in 1946. "I'd driven through France under German artillery. I'd helped supply armies that liberated Europe, and I came home to a place where I couldn't vote, couldn't eat in certain restaurants, couldn't stay in certain hotels. We'd fought for freedom, but we didn't have it ourselves." The contradiction was stark and painful. These men had proven beyond doubt that racial segregation was based on prejudice, not capability. Yet segregation persisted. But their service hadn't been meaningless. The evidence they'd created of black soldiers performing brilliantly in demanding roles contributed to growing pressure for change. In July 1948, President Harry Truman signed Executive Order 9981, mandating integration of the armed forces. The order stated, "There shall be equality of treatment and opportunity for all persons in the armed services without regard to race, color, religion, or national origin." This didn't happen in a vacuum. It resulted from years of advocacy by civil rights leaders, pressure from black veterans organizations, and mounting evidence that segregation harmed military effectiveness. Red Ball Express drivers had contributed crucial evidence to that case. General Jacob Devers, who commanded American forces in southern France, stated in post-war reports, "Negro troops have established themselves as fighting men no less than any other troops. I believe integration in the armed forces is not only just, but militarily necessary." Colonel John Eisenhower, reflecting on Red Ball operations years later, wrote, "The performance of Negro truck drivers during the pursuit across France demonstrated capabilities that racist policies claimed they lacked. They were essential to victory. That fact could not be denied, regardless of prejudice." The integration of the armed forces proceeded slowly. The army resisted most vigorously, clinging to segregationist policies until the Korean War forced change. By 1954, the last segregated units had been disbanded. The military became one of the first major American institutions to integrate. This transformation owed much to Red Ball drivers who'd served with distinction despite discrimination. Their service had created an undeniable record that undermined racist justifications for segregation. Private James Rucard, interviewed in the 1990 seconds about his Red Ball service, reflected, "We knew we were proving something. Every time we delivered supplies on time, every time we kept the army moving, we were showing that the segregationists were wrong. We were fighting 2 wars against Germany and against prejudice. We won both, eventually." The operational innovations pioneered by Red Ball Express influenced American military logistics for generations. During the Korean War, similar dedicated supply routes appeared. The Pusan perimeter defense in 1950 relied on continuous truck convoys using highways reserved for military traffic. The system featured one-way routes, traffic control points, and standardized vehicles, all direct descendants of Red Ball principles. The march to the Yalu River in autumn 1950 required sustaining supply lines stretching over 300 miles from Pusan. Transportation Corps units, many led by officers who'd served during World War II, applied lessons learned in France to Korean conditions. Vietnam presented different challenges. Dense jungle, limited road networks, and guerrilla warfare demanded adaptations. But fundamental principles remained: redundancy, flexibility, and overwhelming capacity. Route 19, from Quyenyon to Pleiku, became essentially a Red Ball route adapted to Southeast Asian conditions. Convoys moved continuously, protected by military police and reaction forces, delivering supplies to isolated bases. The famous Red Ball Express name even reappeared informally. Units delivering emergency supplies to besieged bases sometimes marked their trucks with red insignia, consciously invoking the World War II legacy. Desert Storm in 1991 represented the culmination of logistics innovations begun in World War II. The build-up for Operation Desert Storm moved 500,000 troops and 7 million tons of equipment to Saudi Arabia in 6 months. The ground campaign consumed supplies at rates exceeding anything in the European theatre of World War II. Planning for Desert Storm explicitly studied Red Ball operations. The log package system that sustained the rapid advance into Iraq drew directly on World War II, experienced dedicated supply routes, continuous operations, standardized vehicles, and redundant capacity. Colonel Stephen Relier, chief logistics planner for Desert Storm, stated in post-operation reports, "We studied the Red Ball Express extensively. The principles established in 1944 remained valid: maintain continuous flow, build redundancy into systems, standardize equipment, and train personnel to function under pressure. Those principles worked in France, and they worked in Iraq." Modern American military logistics doctrine emphasizes exactly what Red Ball demonstrated: that sustainable high-tempo operations require logistics systems designed for surge capacity, that redundancy prevents single-point failures, and that trained, motivated personnel matter more than any equipment. September 1985, Alexandria, Virginia. Over 500 Red Ball Express veterans gathered for their first formal reunion 41 years after operations ended. They came from across America, many traveling hundreds of miles. They brought families who'd heard stories but never fully understood what their fathers and grandfathers had accomplished. Former Corporal Charles Johnson, who'd served with the 793rd Military Police Battalion directing Red Ball traffic, spoke at the reunion. "We moved over 400,000 tons in 83 days. We kept armies advancing when conventional wisdom said supply chains must fail. And we did it as young men, many of us teenagers, most of us scared, all of us determined." The reunion featured exhibits showing Red Ball routes, displays of CCKW trucks, and documentation of the operation's scope. Veterans shared stories they'd kept private for decades. Some stories were heroic midnight runs through artillery fire, evacuating supplies ahead of German advances, maintaining operations despite exhaustion. Some were painful memories of discrimination, of white units refusing to assist broken-down black drivers, of returning home to a nation that still treated them as second-class citizens. But overwhelming was pride. They'd accomplished something extraordinary. They'd proven themselves under conditions few ever face. They'd contributed to victory as surely as any combat soldier. Washington Rector, then 67 years old, told reporters, "I'm proud of what we did. We faced discrimination, but we didn't let it stop us. We had a job, and we did it better than anyone thought possible. That's what I want my grandchildren to remember." The reunion established the Red Ball Express Veterans Association, dedicated to preserving the operation's history and ensuring future generations understood this contribution to victory. When historians assess why Allied forces won World War II, they cite many factors: industrial capacity, technological advantage, strategic bombing, tactical innovation, and operational competence. All true. But underneath every advance, every battle, every victory was logistics. The Red Ball Express symbolized this reality in its purest form. 6,000 trucks, 23,000 drivers, 83 days, 412,000 tons. Those numbers represented more than tonnage moved. They represented proof that modern warfare had fundamentally changed, that industrial capacity decided outcomes as surely as battlefield tactics, that logistics personnel were as essential as combat troops. General Dwight Eisenhower understood this. His inclusion of the 2.5-ton truck among the 6 most important weapons of the war wasn't hyperbole, it was accurate strategic assessment. Those trucks and the young men who drove them enabled everything else. Without fuel delivered by Red Ball convoys, Patton's tanks couldn't advance. Without ammunition moved by those trucks, artillery couldn't fire. Without supplies hauled along those routes, armies couldn't fight. The Germans learned this lesson catastrophically. They'd entered the war, assuming traditional logistics would suffice. They discovered modern mechanized warfare demanded industrial capacity they didn't possess and logistics innovation they couldn't match. By 1944, every German defensive plan assumed Allied logistics would eventually fail. Every assumption proved wrong. American logistics never failed. It grew stronger, more efficient, more overwhelming as the war progressed. The Red Ball Express was both symptom and symbol of this dominance. Symptom because it emerged from crisis when conventional systems couldn't keep pace. Symbol because it demonstrated American capacity to innovate, adapt, and overwhelm problems through sheer industrial might. Today, the Red Ball Express is remembered primarily by military historians and veterans' families. It doesn't feature prominently in popular memory of World War II, but its legacy persists everywhere modern militaries operate. Every time American forces deploy overseas, the logistics planning draws on principles established in 1944. Every dedicated supply route uses concepts pioneered by Red Ball. Every standardized military vehicle reflects lessons learned about interoperability. The men who drove those trucks are nearly all gone now. The youngest Red Ball drivers were born around 1920. They'd be over 105 years old today. The last veterans passed away in the early 2000s. But their achievement remains. They proved that wars are won in supply depots as much as battlefields. They demonstrated that young people pushed to their limits can accomplish extraordinary things. They showed that racial prejudice was wrong, helping pave the way for integration. 83 days. Summer and autumn, 1944. American trucks rolling through France, marked with red balls, driven by exhausted soldiers who kept going because the men at the front needed what they carried. That was the Red Ball Express. A temporary solution to a crisis that became one of the most significant logistics operations in military history. The next time you hear about American military logistics, about how US forces can deploy anywhere globally and sustain operations indefinitely, remember it started here. With 6,000 GMC trucks, with 23,000 drivers, most of them under 25 years old, 3/4 of them black soldiers serving a segregated nation. With 83 days of continuous operations that changed how wars are fought, the Red Ball Express proved a fundamental truth. In modern warfare, the side that can deliver more supplies faster wins. Germany learned that lesson too late. They watched American truck convoys roll past their positions day and night, endless streams of vehicles bringing unlimited supplies to forces that could never be stopped because they never ran out. That was America's secret weapon. Not just the capacity to produce, but the ability to deliver production to the point of need faster than enemies could respond. The Red Ball Express embodied this advantage perfectly, rolling through France, delivering victory, one truckload at a time,